April 1945, Bayreuth, Germany. Smoke drifted over the valley like the breath of something dying, and the first thing Sergeant John Langford saw as his Sherman tank crawled up the muddy slope was a bare human arm sticking out from the wreck of a collapsed barn. At first he thought it was a corpse. Most corpses by now were stiff, hollow, gray. But this arm twitched, weakly, almost invisibly, and that tiny flicker of life cut through the noise of war sharper than any rifle crack. He signaled his driver to halt, boots hitting the ground before the tank fully stopped. The cold air smelled of burned hay, wet wood, and the sour stench of starvation. He shouted for anyone inside to call out, but no one answered. Only the crumble of shifting beams replied. And then, from somewhere deep under the wreckage, came a sound he had not expected in a war that had already shown him everything. A woman's voice whispering a single German word. "Bit! Please!" Langford didn't hesitate. He ripped off his gloves, pushed against a broken support beam, and nearly gagged as dust and rot puffed into the air. "Move the tank up as a brace!" he yelled to his crew. "Slow, slow, don't crush anything." The tank lurched forward, metal treads grinding until its bulk pressed against the leaning roof, giving Langford enough room to squeeze inside. The darkness swallowed him. For a moment he saw nothing. Then shapes materialized, dozens, maybe more, slumped against walls, sprawled across the floor, stacked on one another like discarded grain sacks. Eyes glinted in the dim light, hollow and terrified. Faces sunken. Lips cracked. Someone tried to lift their head but couldn't. Langford froze, breath caught in his throat. There weren't 10 people in here. There weren't 50. There were scores. Too many to count. All women. All starving. A hand clawed weakly at his boot. "Amerikaner," a woman rasped. Her voice was barely human, as though her throat had forgotten how to make sound. Langford dropped to one knee, pulled out his canteen, and tipped water to her lips. She gasped like the liquid hurt, but she drank anyway. Another woman reached for him. Then another. And another. The barn wasn't just a shelter. It was a tomb that refused to finish its work. Outside, Private Dawson climbed onto the tank and shouted, "Sarge! We got orders to push through this valley. Abrams wants us near the highway before sundown." Langford ignored him. He tore off the tarp from the back of the tank, dragged it inside, spread it over several shivering women, then tossed Dawson his remaining rations. "Hand this out. Everything. I don't care if it's all we've got. But orders. Damn the orders. Move!" They worked fast. Dawson crawled through the ruins handing out chocolate bars, water, anything edible. Johnson used the tank's tools to pry open a gap in the wall to let in sunlight. As the beams widened, the full horror became visible. Nearly 200 German civilian women, ages from teenagers to elderly, many too weak to speak. Their dresses hung like rags. Some had wrapped children's blankets around their shoulders. Others had bare feet, swollen and red. A few had bruises that told their own stories. Whatever had happened here hadn't happened in a day. This was weeks of starvation, abandonment, terror. Langford stepped outside for air and found an old farmer standing at the edge of the field, pale as milk, shaking his head. "Die SS," he muttered. "They brought the women here last month. Said they would return with food. They never did. Why didn't you help them?" Langford snapped. The farmer didn't answer. His silence said everything. The radio crackled. "Tank 37, report. Status?" Langford lifted the handset. His voice stayed steady even though his heart felt like it was punching through his ribs. "We found civilians. Approximately 200 women. Starving. Barn collapse. Immediate medical need." Abrams' voice came back cold but clear. "You're supposed to be moving, Sergeant." Langford hesitated. Then answered the truth. "Sir, if we move, they die." There was a long pause, too long. Dawson swallowed hard. Johnson wiped dust from his face. The tank's engine hummed impatiently like it wanted to rejoin the war. Finally, "I'm en route," Abrams said. "Hold position. Do not abandon them. Langford exhaled, shoulders sinking. He went back inside and kept pulling survivors toward the entrance where sunlight warmed their skin. More voices whispered for help now. More hands reached out. 2 women cried when they saw American uniforms, not because they feared them, but because for the first time in weeks, someone had come. 20 minutes later, Abrams' jeep rolled up. The lieutenant colonel stepped out, expression unreadable, eyes scanning the wreckage. He looked at the women. He looked at Langford. He looked at the tank being used like a brace instead of a weapon. His jaw tightened. "You disobeyed forward movement orders," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," Langford replied. "You gave away your entire ration supply." "Yes, sir." "You put your tank at risk to support a collapsing structure." Langford nodded, ready to accept any punishment. Abrams stared at him for a moment, then walked into the barn, kneeling beside one of the women. He took out his own canteen, placed it gently to her lips, and waited as she drank. Then he stood, faced his men, and said in a low voice only they could hear, "Finish what you started." But before the relief settled, the old farmer returned with 2 other locals, pointing into the barn with shaking fingers. "Not all of them are innocent," he warned. "Some of those women, some of them worked for the SS." Langford's stomach dropped. The war wasn't done with them yet. The barn wasn't just a place of suffering. It might also be a place of secrets. And now, with 200 lives in their hands, the Americans had to uncover who these women really were, victims, collaborators, or something far more complicated. And the valley, quiet moments ago, suddenly felt like the most dangerous place in Germany. Abrams ordered the jeep moved closer, its headlights cutting through the dim interior of the wrecked barn as dusk settled over the valley. Medics from the trailing half-track arrived minutes later, carrying canvas stretchers and tin boxes of morphine, sulfa powder, and bandages. But even with their arrival, the mood had shifted. What had been a desperate rescue was now tangled with suspicion. Langford watched the locals ring the barn entrance, whispering among themselves, pointing at certain women with tight, angry faces. The soldiers could feel the tension thickening, almost as suffocating as the dust in the air. One of the women, younger than most, maybe 20, began whispering frantically to the woman beside her when she caught sight of the townspeople. Langford noticed her flinch whenever a villager pointed. He approached slowly, hands open, calm. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she shook her head violently and tried to scoot backward, but she was too weak to move more than a few inches. Her eyes darted between Langford and the approaching locals, like an animal preparing for a trap to spring. Abrams stepped past Langford. "Sergeant, keep the civilians back. I don't want them interfering with triage." Langford nodded and moved to block the villagers. One of them, a gaunt man with a soot-smeared coat, spat at the ground near Langford's boots. "You Americans don't know what you found," he said. "Some of these women called the SS into our homes. They pointed out who resisted. They helped round people up." Langford's jaw tightened. "You have proof?" The man folded his arms. "We know their faces. That's proof enough." Inside the barn, medics began separating the weakest women from those who could still stand or talk. It became clear immediately that many had gone days without solid food. One woman's pulse flickered so faintly the medic had to press twice to feel it. Another's skin peeled at the touch from dehydration. A few tried to explain what had happened, but their voices trembled, German words strangled by exhaustion and fear. Langford helped carry the stretcher of an elderly woman whose hands trembled uncontrollably. As he laid her down near a patch of sunlight, she reached up and gripped his wrist with surprising strength. Nicht alle bows," she whispered. Not all bad." He nodded, unsure whether she meant the villagers or the women, or both. Outside, Abrams gathered the crew. "We're not just feeding people now," he said quietly. "We're walking into a potential war crime investigation. The war's ending, but everything that came before it isn't disappearing." Dawson scratched the back of his neck. "Sir, you saying we might have SS women sitting inside that barn?" Abrams looked toward the structure, its sagging roof, its splintered beams, its 100 pairs of desperate eyes. "I'm saying we don't know who these women are yet." Johnson frowned. "They sure as hell look like victims." "Victims can also be collaborators," Abrams replied. "And collaborators can look like victims." A cry rose from deeper inside the barn. Langford rushed in to find two women arguing weakly, one pointing a trembling finger at the younger woman who tried to hide earlier. Langford separated them gently, though even his light touch made them wince. A medic translated as one of the older women spoke through sobs. "She says the girl served the SS as a helferin." "A helper?" Langford stared at the girl. She couldn't lift her head. Could barely breathe. He tried to imagine her orchestrating cruelty, giving orders, pointing out victims, but war twisted people into roles no one would choose. And desperation sharpened accusations into weapons. The medic continued. "She says the girl locked the barn from inside to keep others from leaving. She says the girl was waiting for the SS to return." The younger woman suddenly gasped and shook her head violently. She mumbled several words too fast to catch, but the fear in her eyes wasn't the fear of guilt. It was the fear of being judged by the wrong side at the wrong time. Abrams entered behind Langford and listened to the translation. His expression hardened slightly, but he didn't draw conclusions. "Sergeant," he said softly, "get her outside. Not to punish her. To separate her before someone gets hurt." Langford and Johnson lifted her gently, carrying her past the villagers. Immediately the locals leaned forward, whispering angrily. One woman in a headscarf spat at the ground. "I know her," she said. "She stood with the SS when my brother was taken. Don't pretend she's innocent just because she's hungry." Langford ignored the hostility and laid the frail girl near the jeep, far enough from both the villagers and the other survivors. He draped his jacket over her as she curled into herself, shivering. For a moment, she reached faintly for his sleeve, but then her hand dropped. Abrams crouched beside her. "Ask her name," he said. Langford repeated the question in broken German. After a long silence, she whispered, "Lena, why were you here?" Abrams asked through the medic. Lena stared toward the barn with hollow eyes before forcing out a rattled breath. Words trickled from her like water leaking from a cracked cup. The medic translated. "She says she wasn't waiting for the SS. She says she was hiding from them." Langford felt a chill. The medic continued. "She says they brought the women here, then took someone with them. She doesn't know who. She thought the SS would come back and kill anyone who tried to escape." Abrams stood slowly. The weight of command settled on his shoulders like fresh mud. "Sergeant, we're going to need statements. We need to know exactly what happened here." Langford nodded. "And the villagers? We keep them from tearing this place apart. The war is ending, but revenge is just getting started." As darkness crept over the valley, fires were lit outside the barn to keep the survivors warm. Soldiers handed out the last of their rations. The women huddled close, some crying softly, others staring blankly into the flames. And somewhere in the quiet, as the embers popped and the wind rustled through broken timbers, Langford felt the truth settling in his gut. Saving these women was only the beginning. Finding out who they truly were, that was the battle still ahead. The night settled heavy over the valley, the kind of darkness that swallowed the last colors of the day and replaced them with silence thick enough to choke on. Soldiers rotated guard shifts, keeping villagers at a distance while medics treated the weakest of the women under lantern light. Langford stood near the entrance of the barn, arms folded, eyes scanning the dim silhouettes for any sign of trouble. He wasn't worried about German soldiers. The front had moved beyond Bayreuth. What unsettled him were the villagers, and the weight of their anger. Inside, the survivors drifted between exhaustion and panic. Some slept in uneven breaths. Others jerked awake at the slightest creak of wood, fearing SS boots returning. Abrams moved between them with quiet, firm steps, talking to each medic, checking each small fire, saying little but taking in everything. Langford stepped away from the barn to clear his thoughts. The stars overhead were sharp and cold. "Feels wrong," Dawson muttered beside him. Like we're sitting in the middle of some secret we're supposed to pretend we don't see. Langford nodded. We've walked into something deeper than a rescue. Abrams knows it. Yeah, Langford said. That's why he hasn't left. A soft cry carried on the wind. One of the women near the barn entrance had woken up in terror, clutching her head, shaking. Langford rushed over, kneeling beside her. You're safe, he murmured. No SS. No guards. Just us. But she didn't understand the words. She pushed him away, eyes wide, repeating the same German phrase over and over. Johnson brought the medic, who translated. She says the SS made them take someone. She keeps saying, we didn't want it. We didn't want it. Langford exchanged a glance with the medic, unease creeping in. These weren't simple accusations, or simple truths. Something had happened to these women that went beyond starvation. Abrams approached, brow furrowed. We need to start interviewing the ones who can speak, he said. Quietly. Away from the villagers. I want facts, not rumors. The medic nodded. 2 are strong enough to talk. 1 older. 1 middle-aged. Both seem lucid. The first woman, Marta, had silver hair and eyes that looked older than her body. They sat her near the jeep where a lantern cast a soft circle of light. Abrams stood back while Langford crouched beside her, speaking gently. What happened in the barn? She closed her eyes as if bracing herself. The SS brought us there, she said through the medic. Told us the Russians were coming. They took our papers. Told us to wait. How long? Many days. We lost count. Why didn't you try to escape? Marta's breath hitched. The doors were locked. And when someone tried, one of the guards shot her. A cold stillness settled over the men. Where did the SS go? Langford asked. They left one night. We heard their trucks. They did not come back. Did any of the women work for them? Marta hesitated. Her hands trembled. She shook her head, but Langford could tell she wasn't telling everything. The second woman, Hilda, had sharper eyes. Her voice was thin but steady. Some women served as cooks, cleaners, helpers, she said. Not by choice. The SS took them from villages. Forced them to work. What about Lena? Langford asked. At the mention of the young woman's name, Hilda looked away. Lena was chosen often. She knew things the rest of us didn't. Knew what? The guards trusted her. She heard things. Like what? Langford pressed. Hilda swallowed and gestured toward the barn. There was talk of a list. Names. People the SS wanted moved somewhere else before the Americans arrived. A list of who? We never saw it. She did. Abrams stepped forward for the first time. Sergeant, I want you to find that girl. Make sure she's stable enough to talk. Langford nodded and headed toward the fire where Lena lay under blankets. Her breathing was shallow, but she was awake. When Langford knelt beside her, she looked at him with hollow fear. Lena, he said softly, we need to know what happened before we got here. She blinked slowly, then parted her lips. Her voice cracked like dried leaves. They made me stay close to them, she whispered. Not because I wanted to. Because if I didn't, they said they'd kill my mother. Langford felt his stomach drop. Did you help them? He asked. I did what they told me to do, she said, tears sliding down her cheeks. But I never pointed at anyone. Never. Why were you afraid when the villagers arrived? Her breath hitched. Because they hate anyone who stood near the SS, even if it was forced. They would not ask why. They would only punish. Langford sat back, struggling with the complexity of her words. Nothing in this valley was simple. Innocence wasn't clean. Guilt wasn't clear. War had twisted every line between them. Suddenly a shout erupted from the edge of the field. Dawson ran toward Langford. Sarge! You better come see this. Langford followed him to the back of the barn, where Johnson held up a large wooden board they had found wedged behind the hay stacks. Nailed to it was a piece of torn paper with a handwritten list, names, ages, and notations. The medic translated. These are the names of women the SS selected. Some have marks next to them. Some say relocate. Some say examine. And this one, he pointed. This says keep separate. The name next to that mark was Lena's. Langford felt the hairs on his neck rise. Abrams needs to see this, he said. When they brought the list to Abrams, he stared at it for a long, silent minute. This changes everything, he murmured. Some of these women weren't abandoned victims. They were being catalogued. For what? Dawson asked. Maybe evacuation. Maybe interrogation. Maybe worse. Abrams folded the list and slipped it into his coat. Tomorrow morning we begin sorting truth from rumor. But tonight, no one leaves, no one is touched, and no villager gets within 50 yards of this barn. Am I clear? Yes, sir, Langford said. As he walked back toward the fading firelight, Langford felt a realization settle like frost in his bones. Saving these women had brought them into the center of a story the war had tried to bury, a story that now placed American soldiers in the role of rescuers, detectives, and judges all at once. And dawn would only make the truth harder. The morning broke with a gray, wounded light that barely warmed the frost on the grass. Smoke from the soldiers' small fires drifted upward in thin ribbons, and for a moment the valley seemed strangely peaceful, as if it were holding its breath before revealing whatever truth it had buried in the collapsed barn. Langford stood beside the tank sipping cold coffee from a tin cup, eyes fixed on the field where villagers had already begun gathering, whispering, pointing, waiting for someone to blame. Abrams had ordered them back, but anger moved faster than orders, and grief had a way of sharpening into something deadly. Inside the barn, the survivors stirred slowly, the night having given them just enough strength to feel the pain of their own hunger again. Medics rotated between them, checking pulses, rubbing warmth into frozen fingers, offering thin porridge and sips of water. Some cried softly as the sun touched their skin. Others looked away, ashamed to be seen in such a state by the men who had saved them. Langford knelt beside a woman named Annalise, who had regained enough strength to sit upright. She clasped his wrist with ice-cold fingers and murmured, "You came before the wolves." He didn't understand fully, but he understood enough. "We're not leaving you," he said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears. "No one else came." Abrams approached with the folded SS list tucked inside his coat. "Sergeant," he said, "we start sorting statements today. I want every woman who can speak to be interviewed by you, Johnson, and the medic. Keep it calm. No accusations. No pressure." Langford nodded. "Yes, sir. And keep Lena separate until we know exactly what her role was. She's fragile, but she may also be the only person who knows why the SS marked certain women." The first interview was with a middle-aged woman named Greta. She sat beneath the broken rafters, hands clasped, eyes distant. "The SS didn't choose randomly," she said through the medic. "They took women who spoke multiple languages. Women who worked in offices. Women who had husbands missing on the Eastern Front." "Why those women?" Langford asked. Greta hesitated. "Because those women knew things. Documents. Locations. People." "Were they collaborators?" Johnson asked. Greta shook her head fiercely. "No. They were threats. The SS wanted control over anyone who had information they found useful." "So you're saying they weren't helping the SS, they were being used by them?" Her eyes filled. "We were all used." The second interview told a different story. A woman named Ilsa admitted she had served as a cook for an SS unit, forced into service when her village was occupied. "If I refused, they would shoot my father," she whispered. "What choice does a daughter have?" Langford sat back, weighing her trembling words. Nothing here was black and white. Nothing was simple. By midday, tension between villagers and soldiers reached a boiling point. A shouting match erupted when a young man insisted he recognized two of the women as traitors, who had reported his uncle for hiding weapons. Abrams intervened, stepping between the man and the soldiers. No one here is judge or jury, he said calmly. Not you. Not us. Not today. The man glared at him. You Americans saved them. But they helped kill us. Abrams didn't flinch. If they're guilty, we'll find out. But we do it by evidence, not fear. Langford felt the weight of those words as he returned to Lena. She lay wrapped in blankets near the jeep, her breathing shallow but steadier than the night before. Her eyes flicked open as he approached. You found the list, she whispered. Yes. Her throat tightened. You think I'm on it because I helped them. I think you're on it because they wanted something from you, Langford said gently. We need to know what. She swallowed hard. The SS officer. Hauptmann Kryler. He kept me close because I spoke French. He forced me to translate when they questioned women who fled the Eastern Front. Did you point anyone out? Her eyes widened with hurt. No. I only translated. That was all. They said if I got anything wrong, they would shoot my mother. Where is she now? Langford asked quietly. Lena's voice broke. They took her. 2 days before they left. I haven't seen her since. Langford clenched his jaw. The valley suddenly felt colder than before. Before he could respond, Johnson jogged toward him. Sarge, you need to see this. They followed him to the far side of the barn, where the soldiers had cleared more debris. Beneath a collapsed beam lay a smaller locked door half buried in hay. Langford pried it open with a crowbar, and revealed a hidden storage space. Inside were rusted chains, dried blood stains on the dirt, and a scattering of torn documents stamped with SS insignia. Abrams arrived moments later. He crouched low, examining the space without touching anything. This wasn't just a shelter, he murmured. This was a holding area. For what? Dawson asked. Interrogations, Abrams said. Maybe worse. The medic sifted through the torn documents, piecing together fragments. Sir, these are lists of interrogated women. Some match the names we found last night. Langford's stomach twisted. So the women weren't just abandoned. They were prisoners. Abrams nodded grimly. The SS didn't intend for them to survive long enough for us to find them. The barn collapsing may have been accidental, or deliberate. As the sun dipped lower, Langford returned to Lena with the weight of the discovery heavy in his chest. She watched him approach, fear trembling in her breath. You weren't helping them, he said softly. You were one of their prisoners too. She closed her eyes, tears streaming silently. Langford draped his coat over her shoulders. We're going to find out what happened to your mother. I promise. For the first time, Lena looked at him with something other than fear, something closer to fragile trust. But as the valley darkened again and the villagers' anger simmered just beyond the soldiers' reach, Langford knew promises would mean nothing unless they uncovered the full truth. And every step deeper into the barn's secrets revealed not just suffering, but a pattern of cruelty the SS had tried to erase before fleeing. The truth was coming to light piece by piece. And with it came a question heavier than any weapon Langford had carried. Which women had survived because of the SS? And which had survived in spite of them?